Genesis chapter 37, verses 1 through 4 and 12 through 28. Hear the word of the Lord. Jacob settles in the land where his father lives as an alien, the land of Canaan. This is the story of the family of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, is shepherding the flock with his brothers. He is a helper to the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brings a bad report of them to their father. Now Israel loves Joseph more than any other of his children, because he is the son of his old age. And he has made for him a special tunic. But when his brothers see their father loves him more than all his brothers, they hate him and cannot speak for peace to him. Now his brothers go to pasture their father's flock near Shechem. And Israel says to Joseph, "Are not your brothers pasturing the flock at Shechem? Come, I send you to them." He answers, "Here I am." So he says to him, "Now, see if it is well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring word back to me." So he sends him from the valley of Hebron. He comes to Shechem and finds a man wandering in the fields. And the man asks him, "What are you seeking?" "I am seeking my brothers," he says. "Tell me, please, where they are pasturing the flock." The man says, "They go away, for I hear them say, 'Let us go to Dothan.'" So Joseph goes after his brothers and finds them at Dothan. They see him from a distance, and before he comes near to them, they conspire to kill him. They say to one another, "Here comes this dreamer. Come now, we kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we say a wild animal devours him, and we see what becomes of his dreams." But when Reuben hears it, he delivers him out of their hands, saying, "Let us not take his life." Reuben says to them, "Shed no blood. Throw him into this pit here in the wilderness, but lay no hand on him, that he might rescue him out of their hand and restore him to his father." So when Joseph comes to his brothers, they strip him of his robe, the special tunic that he wears, and they take him and throw him into a pit. The pit is empty. There is no water in it. Then they sit down to eat, and looking up, they see a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead, with their camels carrying gum, balm, and resin, on their way to carry it down to Egypt. Then Judah says to his brothers, "What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him, for he is our brother, our own flesh." And his brothers agreed. When some Midianite traders pass by, they draw Joseph up, lifting him out of the pit, and sell him to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. And they take Joseph to Egypt. Word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
We went to the Holocaust Museum a week ago. There was a poignant sign reading, "This museum is not an answer. It is a question." It was a question about violence in the Holocaust. It was a question about how a nation could allow such to happen. It was a question about why we so often refuse to get involved in uncomfortable situations. It was a question about where along a growing trend of violence against a sector of society was the point that went too far. When it comes to violence directed against others, when do we step in to limit violence and abuse? Where do we become responsible? most of the Bible is not a list of commandments or even a compilation of stories telling us exactly how we are to live. The narratives we find in Genesis, for example, are more about calling us to reflection. They are stories begging or requiring us to ask questions. Just like the exhibits at the Holocaust Museum in D.C., these stories are played out before us with an invitation to reflect on what was done, how we would do, and what we should do. All too often, however, we allow ourselves to be distracted by some shiny object that diverts our attention. I recall singing in a children's cantata decades ago that spent a lot of energy on Joseph's coat of many colors. There was a musical for teens about the same time whose title was about Joseph's coat. There's a bit of a problem with this. First of all, the coat is rather secondary to the narrative. It appears only to highlight the deference given to Joseph and as a representation of Joseph to his father. Secondly, the idea of it being multicolored comes from a poor Greek translation of the passage. The Hebrew is more akin to special tunic. The only other use of the term in the Hebrew scriptures is applied to the tunic of a princess. We really don't know what to make of the term, though some claim this tunic was likely a woman's garment. To the point of the narrative, however, the tunic is peripheral. It helps advance the plot, but it should not take center stage in our reading of the text. The plot and action focus on Joseph's family, on how they treat and respond to him. We see more of the dysfunction in Jacob's family as he visibly plays favorites, and as the brothers hold that against Joseph. They seem to believe that if Joseph were not around, they would no longer have to compete for their father's love, affection, and attention. While Jacob is the one most at fault in this dysfunction, the brothers place the blame on Joseph. He has taken center stage in their father's affections. Joseph is assigned to be a helper to his brothers in their care of the family's flocks. As the number of animals is great, they must travel far afield to find pasture for them. It is at one of these points at which the brothers have taken the flock some distance from home that Joseph is sent out to find his brothers and bring back word to their father on their welfare and that of the flocks. Joseph embraces the charge placed upon him and sets out to find his brothers. They're not where he first expected to find them, for they've moved on to seek new pastures for the animals. Joseph continues after them, however, getting some indication of where they had headed from others along the route. He finally locates them and draws near to get news of their well-being and that of the animals. This is where the special tunic Jacob had made for him becomes important. The brothers are able to recognize him as he approaches, for this tunic stands out, even at a distance. Before he arrives, the brothers have time to hatch a plan for dealing with their needless, stashing him in one of the pits in the area. Reuben, the eldest among them, grows concerned. He knows he is outnumbered by the other two. But he leans into his responsibility and position as eldest brother and firstborn son. He pretends to go along with the others, though he determines to intervene so as to protect Joseph's life. While the others make plans to kill Joseph and use the pit to hide the body, Reuben talks them into lowering him into a pit, but not killing him. He assumes that he would be able to find some way to rescue Joseph and return him alive to their father. The brothers agree to Reuben's suggestion of not killing him. They strip the special tunic off of Joseph and throw him into one of the pits. Then they sit around to eat their meal. Before long, they recognize an unexpected opportunity with the approach of the trading caravan. One of the brothers, Judah, suggests that they sell Joseph as a slave to the caravan drivers, and he would be sold again down in Egypt, far away from their father. And this way they could be rid of Joseph, not become murderers, and still make a profit. Any violence done to him would come at the hands of others, and they could wash their hands of any guilt and responsibility. Reuben had been the first to seek a way to limit violence proposed against Joseph. Judah follows that up with his suggestion of selling him off but saving his life. Joseph would neither die by their hands, die of exposure from being left in one of the pits, nor would he be left to defend himself alone from predators. The originally planned violence was lessened. It was passed off into the hands of others. Now, on their return to their father, they could simply imply that Joseph was killed by some wild animal, and they would be freed from having to deal with this pestering brother, who got much more than his share of their father's love and attention. Surely now life would begin to look up for them. They would no longer need to vie for their father's attention. Without killing Joseph, they simply removed him from the family equation. What they did not count on was that their father would spiral downward in grief over the loss of his son. In limiting the violence they had intended to carry out, they did not resolve the conflict that lay at the heart of their family dynamics. We know from the rest of the story that God yet intervened in Joseph's life and turned his circumstances around to benefit all of Egypt and the surrounding territories. But no, limiting the proposed violence against Jacob, though it was better than going forward, it did not raise their actions and decisions to the level of being good. Joseph had never been the real problem anyway. Sure, he added to the family dysfunction in the way he reported his dreams to his family members. Sure, he was the focus of Jacob's attention. He was not, however, the originator of their conflict. Removing Joseph from the equation resolved little to nothing. They returned home to a set of family dynamics that were still very messy. Even had Reuben's plan worked out, the plot against Joseph would have come to light and exacerbated the family dynamics. Limiting our violent actions and intentions may set us on a better path, but it does not take us nearly far enough. It doesn't take us to addressing the underlying issues that would call us to wield violence in the first place. We use violence like the preschooler biting another child out of angst over being incapable of communicating their needs and desires. We lash out in response to fears we cannot verbalize or see any way to resolve. Limiting the violence within our natures is a step in the right direction. It does not, however, address the underlying conflict. We tell kindergartners to use their words. Too often as adults, however, we fail to do the same. When will we learn to address conflict without resorting to violence at all? When will we learn to actually seek the welfare of others? To call issues out for what they truly are, address them, and work together for real solutions. Would you